Project MKUltra. Project MKUltra was a top-secret CIA mind control program that sounded like pure science fiction when rumors first leaked. Starting in the 1950s, the agency conducted illegal human experiments on unwitting American and Canadian citizens. The goal was to develop drugs and procedures that could force confessions and manipulate human behavior during interrogations. They targeted vulnerable populations, including mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, and prostitutes, knowing they wouldn't be believed if they complained. Subjects were dosed with massive amounts of LSD, subjected to sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and isolation. In extreme cases, victims were put into drug-induced comas for weeks while recorded messages played on loop to see if their minds could be rewritten. The government dismissed these claims as pure paranoia. It wasn't until the mid-1970s congressional investigations that the truth came out. Even then, the CIA director had ordered most files destroyed, leaving the full scope of the trauma permanently hidden in the shadows. Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a covert operation drafted by the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962 that sounded like the ultimate anti-government paranoia. The plan suggested that the U.S. government commit acts of terrorism against its own citizens and blame it on Cuba to generate public support for a war. The classified documents detailed staging the hijacking of commercial airplanes, blowing up American ships, and orchestrating fake bombings in major U.S. cities. They even proposed wounding or killing American civilians on the streets to create a dramatic media narrative. Military leaders believed a terrified public would enthusiastically back an invasion. The proposal was signed off by high-ranking military commanders and presented to President John F. Kennedy's administration. Kennedy rejected the plan and it was quietly shelved, remaining a deeply buried secret until it was finally declassified in 1997, proving the military had indeed plotted to terrorize its own people. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study is one of the most horrifying medical betrayals in history. Starting in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service tracked hundreds of poor African-American sharecroppers in Alabama who had contracted syphilis. The men were told they were being treated for bad blood, but researchers had no intention of curing them. They wanted to observe the natural progression of the fatal disease until death, treating human subjects like lab rats. Even when penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, researchers actively withheld the medication. They went so far as to prevent the men from seeking treatment elsewhere, ensuring they would continue to suffer. The study went on for 40 years. Dozens of men died directly from the disease, wives contracted it, and children were born with congenital syphilis. Rumors that the government was intentionally letting citizens rot were brushed off as myths until a whistleblower leaked the story in 1972, forcing an end to the experiment. The Prohibition poisoning. The Prohibition poisoning is a dark chapter from the 1920s when the U.S. government literally poisoned the alcohol supply to enforce the law. During Prohibition, millions of Americans turned to industrial alcohol, which bootleggers would steal and redistill to make it drinkable. Frustrated by the rampant defiance, the federal government ordered industrial alcohol manufacturers to mix in highly toxic chemicals, including formaldehyde, kerosene, gasoline, and lethal amounts of methyl alcohol. The goal was to make black market liquor so foul people would stop drinking it. Bootleggers sold it anyway, and the results were catastrophic. Instead of stopping the drinking, the policy resulted in mass poisonings across the nation. Thousands of people went permanently blind, suffered severe neurological damage, or died agonizing deaths. The government publicly defended the program, arguing that if citizens broke the law, they had to accept the consequences. Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip sounded like a classic spy thriller myth. The theory claimed that the United States government secretly rescued top Nazi scientists and brought them to America to work for the U.S. military. When rumors first circulated, they were dismissed as absurd, given that the U.S. had just fought a war to defeat the Nazi regime. However, the conspiracy was entirely true. Realizing a Cold War with the Soviet Union was inevitable, American officials wanted to secure Germany's advanced technology before the Soviets could. Under the direction of the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, more than 1,600 Nazi scientists were quietly relocated. To bypass strict anti-Nazi laws, officials actively whitewashed the scientists' backgrounds, scrubbing their records of war crimes and Nazi Party participation. Many of these scientists, including Wernher von Braun, went on to hold high-level positions in the U.S. military and NASA, shaping the American space program. Project Sunshine. Project Sunshine was a deeply disturbing atomic energy study that emerged during the Cold War. As the United States tested nuclear weapons, rumors spread that the government was secretly collecting human tissue samples to measure the global fallout of radioactive strontium-90. The most grotesque twist was that they were targeting dead babies and young children because their developing bones were highly sensitive to radiation. For a long time, this was dismissed as an urban legend born out of anti-nuclear panic. The reality was much worse. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission launched a massive operation to gather human remains without the consent or knowledge of grieving parents. They established a global network to harvest the bodies of deceased infants, referring to them as human samples. Pathologists would secretly remove bone and tissue samples from dead infants before returning the bodies to the families, all to fuel a classified nuclear safety study. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was the catalyst that dragged the United States deep into the Vietnam War, but the narrative told to the public was a fabricated lie. In August 1964, the U.S. government announced that North Vietnamese torpedo boats had launched 2 unprovoked attacks against an American destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin. President Lyndon B. Johnson used this alleged aggression to swiftly pass a congressional resolution giving him full authority to launch a military intervention. Skeptics who claimed the attacks were faked to manufacture a reason for war were labeled unpatriotic conspiracy theorists. Decades later, highly classified National Security Agency documents confirmed that the second attack never happened at all. The crew had been shooting at false radar images on a stormy night. U.S. officials knew almost immediately that the attack was a ghost illusion, but they hid the truth to justify the massive military escalation. COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program, was a highly illegal domestic spying operation run by the FBI targeting American political organizations. Throughout the 1960s, activists claimed the government was wiretapping their phones, infiltrating meetings, and trying to destroy their reputations, claims dismissed as political paranoia. In 1971, activists broke into an FBI field office, stole classified documents, and leaked them to the press, exposing the operation. Files revealed that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover weaponized the Bureau to surveil, infiltrate, and disrupt any group he deemed subversive, including civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and anti-war protesters. The FBI didn't just watch these groups, they actively tried to dismantle them from the inside. They sent anonymous threatening letters, fabricated evidence to cause internal fights, and used media contacts to smear activists, proving the government was actively sabotaging domestic dissent. The Nayirah Testimony. The Nayirah Testimony was a crucial turning point that convinced the American public to support the 1991 Gulf War, but the entire spectacle was an orchestrated public relations fraud. In October 1990, a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl known only as Nayirah gave a heartbreaking speech before a congressional caucus. Tearfully, she claimed she witnessed Iraqi soldiers entering a Kuwaiti hospital, pulling hundreds of premature babies out of incubators and leaving them to die. The story was shocked the world and was repeated constantly by politicians to justify a military campaign. Following the war, investigative journalists discovered that the entire testimony was completely fabricated. Nayirah was not a volunteer. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. Her speech had been organized, written, and coached by a massive American public relations firm hired by a group funded by the Kuwaiti government, designed specifically to manipulate public emotion into war.